Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of At Home. It's been a really fun adventure this year, and by fun, I mean fun in a lot of senses of the word. This year, 2020, has been a huge adventure. There's been some challenges, there's been a lot of upsides, and I think it's going to be really exciting to talk to my guest today about not just how this year, and the pandemic has affected her and her business, but I think how it relates to problems or challenges that every normal person really faces out there because her business is so focused on things that all of us should really be concerned about. So I just want to say thank you again for joining me for another episode as we've restarted this, or as I've restarted this video series. It's a lot of fun to talk to folks about how they are dealing with these challenges and how to make it work, how to find a rhythm and all that. So I'd love to introduce my guest today, Debbie Hatch. Bring her on here real quick if I can figure out my shortcuts. Debbie, how are you?
Hey Jeff, I'm great. How are you?
I am doing all right. It's actually a pretty beautiful day in California, and it's like I think it's like in the 60s, so it's actually pretty comfortable outside, and it's not too cold in my shed right now, which makes things a lot easier. How are things in Texas?
About the same, actually. Really beautiful day. It was down in the 30s last night, which is a little weird for here, but nice today and comfortable.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for being on this show. I really appreciate it. For the audience, would you mind giving a quick introduction of who you are, what you do, and yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for having me, first of all. This is awesome. My name is Debbie Hatch. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Pinnacle Personnel Services. I actually created my company 16 years ago to travel around. I teach people about financial planning, fiscal responsibility, planning for retirement, things like that. Do a lot of work with the federal government. So many of my customers are federal agencies that will hire me to come in and teach, or federal employees that will hire me to come in and just help them with their own personal stuff. It's been a wild ride for the last 16 years. I started originally traveling worldwide. I was going all over the place, and then that started to slow down as budgets were being cut, and then it was just really centered in the United States. But I traveled a lot. I did an interview with Road Warrior Strong about a year ago, and they said that I was a road warrior among road warriors. So for the last 16 years, Jeff, I spent over 200 days every single year on the road. You can imagine what a huge change this is for me. And I went from 100 to 0 like that.
I can imagine that, especially for a business like yours where you were traveling that much to be physically with people, to teach them, teach webinars, it's probably, to say challenging is probably a gross understatement of how hard how much of an impact that sort of thing has on your business when you're not used to, as part of your regular routine, having to do virtual or like remote based teaching and training. I'm assuming if you're so used to being that much in person with people, doing one-off webinars here and there is probably fine. But when you have to go to that almost exclusively, that's a big, huge change. How was that affected? I'm curious about two things really. How has that affected, more deeply you in like your family life, your personal life, creating that rhythm for yourself to actually do this business successfully? But just as importantly, how has that sort of that type of engagement affected the clients that you work with? Because I have to imagine that their experience with you being in person, there's a very different relationship dynamic that gets built when you're physically in front of somebody. And if they only ever engage with you now remotely, I have to imagine that has an impact on that relationship in the business too.
So much. I don't even know where to begin to unpack that question, to be honest with you. In teaching in the classroom, it's kind of a weird dynamic. Like you're on stage and the audience is there. And I talk to people throughout the day, but by and large, it's a production more or less. And now in the virtual environment, I want people to interact with me. So it was really hard for me in the beginning to change from being in the classroom where I can see their faces and I can see if I need to speed up, if I need to slow down, if they're bored or what exactly is going on. If they're struggling with an area, I could easily see that. I can't see that in the virtual environment. A lot of the classes that I'm doing are webinars where they're typing into a chat room. So we don't have even a two-way visual. We don't have the cameras, largely because I do have a lot of federal customers, and so their firewalls won't withhold them having cameras. So that's been a very, very large change for me. It's been, I think, a tough transition for my clients as well, because we talk about things that are very personal to people. It's about their money. It's about their retirement planning. And it's hard for them to type those questions into a chat room versus they could easily come up and talk to me and ask me questions.
It
Now,
has just sorry
that said,
on that one part of it specifically, because that's really interesting. I mean, I can 100% empathize with. I don't necessarily want to type my personal
right.
unique question where everyone else can see it, because there's a feeling of like, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong, or I've done something negative and I don't want other people to judge me, what have you. But I can also imagine that they may not also want, in various tools that are out there for webinars and web meetings, that you can click a raise your hand button, what have you, and actually ask a question. I can imagine that it's probably just as um, challenging for them to want to actually say that in front of everybody on a camera where anybody can watch them and listen, and like everyone's focused on you right now saying this one question, when, like you said, they could walk up to you in person and like, hey, can we talk over here for just a minute? I've got to imagine that's made some of these engagements a little bit more challenging too.
It really has, and that's been something that I've had to focus on since April as I've been doing more of these, is trying drawing people out of their shell and getting them to feel comfortable in that virtual environment. Many of them really didn't want to do virtual, and I still think they don't want to do virtual by and large, but they've kind of settled into the knowledge that this is how we have to do it now, and if they want to come to training, they're going to have to do that. But here's another thing, and this is a positive, because I think there's pros and cons to all of this. The positive is that they're now taking this training at home versus coming to work and coming into the classroom, which means that their spouses and partners can be with them. And now they're having a lot deeper conversations about money as a couple or as a family, which I think is great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because that's whenever my wife and I have sat down and talked about our finances personally, like what we're doing saving for retirement. One of the things she's brought up a few times, because it's not something she normally thinks about a lot. I got a lot of that from my dad, because that was something he spent a lot of his time doing, was teaching himself how to do these things. And so I'm not an expert by any means, but I at least feel comfortable looking at like our nest egg in our portfolio and understanding basically what it means. And so being able to have that conversation with her, many times she's said to me, or she's asked me, do we need help from someone else? I'm like, when we do, we'll go ask for it. What we do right now isn't, in our early 40s, it's not such a huge deal. But I have noticed that she's even brought up to us a couple different, to me a few times, that she's like, she goes, I'm pretty sure like in girlfriend conversations, she's had her friend conversations over lunch. She's like, none of our friends are having these conversations. None of them as couples are really talking about 10 years down the line, let alone 30 or 40 years down the line. And we do all the time. Like I have an entire spreadsheet my dad built that's a forecasting tool that I can go in and tune at any point to say, if we change this or add to this IRA at this point or whatever, here's what our nest egg will look like in X number of years. But you bring up a good point, because if I was joining, I'm used to doing this on a regular basis. I'm used to being on webinars for what I do professionally. Most people are not. So how do you find yourself, if you're not doing a lot of one-on-one things with people and doing more group-based sessions, which I have to imagine is probably a large portion of what you do, how do you find yourself? What are some of the techniques you use to actually connect with people so they feel like on these remote sessions or these webinars or whatever, that they can actually open up and be willing to have a conversation over these tools?
So, first of all, I think that your wife is quite typical, quite normal, in that there's still a lot of, I don't know that I would call it shame, but for lack of better words, that's what I'll call it right now. When it comes to money, we can talk to other people about just about everything under the sun, and we can have conversations with our girlfriends about everything. But for some reason, money is still the topic that's somewhat off limits. People don't talk about it because they don't feel comfortable. They don't know about it. They're afraid that they might look stupid or whatever the case may be. So I am doing mostly group sessions, and I'm using a lot of live streaming information in these webinars. And that is just pulling people out of their shells in asking questions, not really, really personal questions because people are really uncomfortable with that, but just like general questions to go like, okay, who is finding that they're treating money differently now because of COVID? Like who's spending more, who's spending less? Because we've got people doing both, right? Some people are spending less. They're not going out to eat. They're not traveling. They're not doing all of these things. They're not going to shows. Some people are spending more because they're cooking more at home, or they're doing home improvement projects, or they're doing things like that. And so I bring questions like that out into the open forum where people don't mind answering. And I will start my classes that way to get everybody a little bit more comfortable sharing and also seeing what other people are going through. And then we can transition from that into some of the tougher conversations and talking about their own personal situations with money.
That makes a lot of sense. And what has the feedback been like from a lot of, or from anybody? Like, have you seen consistently feedback saying that people are getting more comfortable with these sorts of things, or is it not, and you're still having to struggle with it, or is it some other sort of balance? I'm really curious to understand how, like, since the beginning of COVID to this point, how has that changed for you?
I think people still want to have the live classes. I mean, I do get some of that feedback, but I'm also getting a lot of feedback that people are getting more comfortable in the virtual environment, and some even prefer it to the physical environment. So for me personally, I mean, this is something that I've wanted to do, and I think that this is probably true for people on a large scale as well. I wanted to cut back on my travel. I wanted to be on the road less. I wanted to get into the virtual environment, but I never had time to do it. I didn't want to go from all of this to nothing like overnight. I didn't want to have to learn to do all the virtual stuff, one day and get up in the morning and be ready to go. But that's the way it happened. Again, the upside is that I have done it, and it is something that I wanted to do for a while. I was forced to do it. And I think that most people are like that too. So they have to come to this training now. It's the only thing that's available. Mm-hmm. They're getting comfortable with it, or they're putting up with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's that compelling event that you don't have a choice in. Like, you need the information, you need to go someplace for it, and this is really the only option. So you go to the place that feels the most comfortable to you, or at least as comfortable as you can make it, which I think leads me to kind of like a pivot in the conversation I want to take, because it strikes me that that's got to add a huge burden on you personally to figure out not just how to connect with them and make them feel comfortable, but that I would imagine that puts a lot of strain on you personally to figure out how do you build these relationships with people and help them still want to come to your business and come to you for learning and training. But that's got to have an impact on not just how you run your business, but you yourself, like as a person, when you step out of these trainings and you're like, close the door for the day of work and you go back to regular life. How has all of this change sort of impacted what you do as just a person every day when you're not working?
When am I not working?
Okay, fair enough. that's a whole other video series we should probably do.
And honestly, Jeff, I was thinking about that earlier as I was getting ready for the interview with you. My schedule was 100% driven by time. I had to be at the airport at a certain time. I had to be in the classroom at a certain time. I had to have, everything was very scheduled. And I found that I operated very well within that environment because I did know when everything was happening. And I would get to the gym every single day and everything went according to plan. And now, unless I have a class scheduled, it's very loose. Like, I don't have time frames for everything. And to be completely honest with you, I've struggled with that. And there have been some times when I get up in the morning and I'm on the computer, I'm working until 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and I haven't left the computer in that entire time, except maybe to walk into the kitchen and get something to eat. So it's definitely been challenging for me to try to find that balance, and I don't know that I've done it, to be honest.
I'm really glad that you said that, because so many people I've talked to struggle with that exact same thing. And whether it's sort of the idea of trying to find a work-life balance, or as Adam Grant would say, like trying to create a rhythm instead, like where some days are going to be super slammed, other days are going to be slow, but over the course of a week or 2 weeks, you find a rhythm for yourself that actually does work. Whatever the system is that works for you is probably a loose way to say that. It's so interesting to hear, because I think most people, and I know for a fact many people that I've talked to, people I work with professionally, friends of mine, would say and have said to me exactly the same thing, that like, hey, I've been doing this for 6-7 months and I'm getting stuff done. My business is working, things are going, but at the end of the day, if I sit back and reflect on it, I'm like, I don't really know that I have much of a balance or much of a real schedule for what I'm doing. Stuff is just getting done because, and you bring it up, we were talking about this pre-show, prior to my current role, I was in sales at my company. And when COVID hit, so many salespeople really freaked out because they didn't know how to be in their role and not be able to drive to customers. And not just because of the in-person interaction with those customers, but because what work can you do while you're driving? Like, especially in the Bay Area of California, when you're driving from, like, hey, you live in the East Bay and you're going down to Santa Clara, which is if there's lots of traffic, that can be an hour and a half drive. It's not really that far, but it can be a long drive. Well, that's a great time to catch up on phone calls or reach out to somebody or listen to a podcast or catch up some training or whatever you want to do. You got plenty of time in that car. We just call it windshield time to get things done that you wouldn't normally take the time to do. And I don't want to say it's a break because it's not really a break, but it is a break from what you were doing professionally. You're changing up to doing something else. And now it is so easy and far too easy to sit at this desk all day long and never even stand. I can't tell you how many times I've got the little reminder on my Apple Watch saying, hey, it's time to get up and stand. I'm like, yeah, dismiss. Or breathe, it's time to breathe. That dismiss. Like that 1 minute of breathing it's asking me to do. I'm like, yeah, we'll get back to that later on.
It's too much, right?
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And I know that a lot of people have experienced this as well. Being in the house with my husband. We've been married for almost 30 years, but I've been in business for 16, and I spend 200 days a year on the road. So normally we would see each other, a couple days a month. Now we get up in the morning. We're not leaving the house. I mean, his office is upstairs, my office is downstairs, and that's as far as we go from one another. And that's been a challenge too.
I can imagine how, not to get too personal, but how has that being at home all the time, both of you, like literally all of the time, and not like having the physical separation that you have from being on the road. Not that everybody needs that, like in your situation of flying and traveling, it's not that everyone needs that sort of distance in a relationship to like keep balance by any means, but when you go from one extreme to another extreme, how has that affected what, you personally, your relationship? I mean, and feel free to be as open or whatever as you want about that.
Yeah, no, it's been a challenge completely. My husband and I have had to have several talks about it because for both of us, I mean, he's used to being in the house by himself and doing whatever he wants and having things wherever he wants. And I'm used to being on the road. So being here and living in his house, it's our house, but I'm not here very often, and interrupting his normal routine and being off the road, that's a big change for me. Being with another person all the time, that's another big change for me. It's been really challenging. And we've had to talk our way through it. We've had to sit down and actually set up, how we're going to interact with one another throughout the day.
Yeah, it's really good to hear that. Not that it's good, but it's good because I think it's something that we don't often think about, which is you hear, like, especially for couples, whether it's, you can say yourself partners or some other label that anybody wants to use. It is a challenge to have a relationship over a long period of time, let alone when you go from one situation like we had pre-COVID to something different. Whatever the difference is doesn't matter, but that stark difference it introduces a new set of friction in a relationship that you have to work through, or else you are going to be even more strained than you were before. My wife and I dealt with something very similar. I mean, she's always been she's always had her own business. She's been in digital marketing for, same period of time, 10, 15 years. And before that, marketing for agencies. So far longer than I've ever known her. And she's always been remote. She works from home, works from an office, works on the couch, whatever she wants. I've always either been in an office or on the road, driving to clients. And now that in COVID, I built this shed so I could literally be out of the house and be in a space in the backyard. But same thing. I'm here all day long. I go in and she's doing stuff and trying to figure out, like, oh, you want to go take a walk? Do you want to do this? You want to go to the store? I'm like, I would love to, but I got work. Or, yeah, I'll go to the store. Oh, crud, I interrupted my work. I need to get back to work. It's really easy to find yourself distracted by things that you weren't distracted by before.
For sure. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that recently too, because I do feel so distractible. And I think there's always been some little bit of a tendency there, but because my schedule was so rigid and everything had to be done at a certain time, I didn't allow myself to be distracted. And now it's very easy to do that. A lot of people too, my clients have said, well, this is kind of a test run for retirement, right? This is what it will be like when you're retired. But I don't think that that's true because we can't go anywhere. Like when we're retired, we'll still be able to have our own, little things and getting out of the house, which you don't have right now.
You know what? I'm so glad you brought that up. So when my mom and dad retired, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, maybe 10 years ago at this point. I don't remember exactly. In whatever time period it was, something that I talked with him about when we went out to go fishing or something right after he retired, we were having a conversation about this. And he said that so many of his friends had already retired and some of them had gone back to work because they didn't know what to do with themselves in retirement. And he said that it took him a number of years, and he and my mom had built up a community at their church and with friends and family. So they already, when they went into retirement, they already had sort of a routine of like, these are the things we do each week. These are the weekend activities. These are the camping groups we have or whatever else. So when they did retire, the routine of life continued. He just didn't go to an office every day. And which for him was great because he actually filled that time with more fishing or more golfing or the other things that he wanted to get done that were, road biking and whatever else. And I remember him telling me that you have to develop those things before you go into retirement, because if you just step into it like, cool, I've got all this free time, it's almost exactly what you're describing, which is like, as he's told me, like, it's exactly the opposite of what you want retirement to actually be if you want it to be an idyllic period for you. If you're just at home all the time, like, nobody wants to just sit at their house all day long. Like, people end up doing that for a long time and they become content in that, but no one wants that when you go into, that's not what people think of retirement actually being, but you have to develop that stuff before you get there. If you try to do it on the fly, it's really tough to do.
For sure. And I tell people all the time, like, you don't want to retire from something. What you want to do is retire to something. So thinking about what that is super important. Your dad was really smart.
It's don't tell him I said that. It's interesting that you describe it that exact way, because it's something that I've learned. I had never heard this before I worked at my current company. As I was looking through roles and whatever else to make, at any point in my career at this company to make changes, I remember a couple mentors saying to me a few times, like, you never want to be running away from something. You always want to be running to something when you're looking for a pivot in your career. Not because you want to be don't want to be negative. It's because you don't want to be like, I'm trying to get away from one thing, because then all you're looking for is the grass is greener sort of mentality. And like, it's not greener, it's just a different shade of green. So it looks a little different from this side, but when you get there, there's just different problems in the other place. If what you're going to is something that's really exciting for you, then you can deal with the challenges when you get there, but you're going to something that's really exciting, and what you're walking away from is like, cool, well, that was a good chapter, I'm done with that, it's time to do the next thing. It's not, get me out of this, I don't ever want to do this again, and somehow this new thing is going to be a magic band-aid that's going to fix everything, because that's not how life works, ever.
Right, exactly, yes.
Very cool. Well, sort of kind of to wind down the conversation, one of the big things I really wanted to ask you about, because I don't think this gets talked about nearly enough when we're talking about COVID and all the things we discuss. And not that either of us have been super negative today, but trying to be very real, like what you deal with as a person and a business owner at the same time. One thing I am really curious about, though, is if you could pinpoint one thing that's actually been really positive that's come out of all of this, what would you say that was or is?
Well, for me, and from a business perspective, it's been establishing deeper relationships with my clients. I have been able to get out, I call it a benefits blast. It's a newsletter. A couple of times a month, I've been able to have really personal conversations with people, because they'll come to the class and they'll say, hey, can we hop on a call? And we've been able to talk about that. So for me, that's been really amazing. And I just am realizing what a support system I have there with my clients. And I love that that's reciprocal, because they feel that I care about them, and I now know that they care about me. So that's been the biggest thing for me, I think.
That is, that is really cool to say out loud, because it pinpoints in on, or hones in on something that happens more organically when you can be in person with people, which is the building of a relationship with somebody when you're in person can happen. It's not really organic. I mean, work has to be put in, and intentional work has to be put into building whatever the relationship basis is, but it can happen more organically because you're in front of somebody, and things naturally tend to occur better when you can read body language and see people's facial expressions when you're 6 feet apart, or like a few feet away from somebody at a lunch table, or having a drink, or playing a sport or something. But when you're over a virtual medium, like you and I doing this interview, or if I'm on WebEx or Zoom, or you pick your platform, you're still seeing the person, but there is this odd barrier that exists that makes it feel really difficult. And what I've noticed is it introduces the need for a lot more intention or intentionality to create a well-founded relationship with somebody when that's all you can do. So the fact that you've been able to do that, I think speaks volumes to not just you, but how you run your business and how you actually work with people. If you're still able to do that successfully with a lot more work or more intention-based work, but you're able to do that. That's really cool.
Thanks, Jeff. And I mean, it really has been intentional driven from me, but what I've done and what's made the biggest difference is really allow myself to be a human. I'm not on the stage.
Go figure.
And so I don't have that separation, right? I don't don't have that, and it's not a production. And so even talking to people, you know, you have, and we're all experiencing this at the same time, which I think is a really cool thing. You have the garbage truck drive by outside your window and there's a racket, or, you know, you lose the power intermittently or whatever. And being able to just talk to people about that and go, oh yeah, that was this, and I know you guys know what that's like, has been the game changer for me. And that's what's really allowed me to have a deeper connection.
Yeah, I could not agree more. At my current company, one of the things they started doing very early on was bringing in people who use collaboration tools a lot to say things like, it is okay that your kids walk in the room. It's okay that your dog is barking. Don't stress about that. And it was more, the wording was more to people who host meetings to tell them it is okay that that happens to other people. Don't worry about it. Let that be a thing, because people need to, you said it, people on the receiving end or joining these things need to feel like it's okay that the life that is happening around them is happening. And like, we can't all be lucky enough to have I have my 5-year-old's actually able to be in school because it's considered daycare. I can be in a shed with my doors closed in the backyard. Most people aren't as lucky to have this like I am most of the day.
Right.
So like, most people are in their kitchen, dining room, on the couch because that's what's working for them at the moment. And that's okay. Like, that's 100% okay and should be. And no one should ever make them feel bad about that. So to be able to, like you said, to just be human around other humans starts to make them feel like, okay, my situation isn't that different from everyone else. All right, I can let some of those like barriers down and actually be open to the conversation that's being had right here in front of me.
Right, for sure. And that's even, I've written about it as well. When I send out the benefits blast to go, okay, I'm struggling right now. This is what's happening in my personal life. And I've had people take the time to send me back an email to go, it's so nice to get information from a real person. And I mean, they call me that too, right? So that's been just really amazing and something that I want to carry forward even after we get out of these times.
That's so cool. I'm really happy to hear that, because I think it's not just great that you're able to be that way to your clients and that they can reciprocate and tell you that that's what's happening. But I got to imagine that you receiving that from somebody, confirming that what you're doing is working and makes them feel like that, that's huge. Because oftentimes we just don't get that response and we don't know, like, am I doing the right thing? Is this good? I don't know. I'm just going to keep going with it because I think that's okay. But when someone can confirm for you and take away that unknown, it's like, oh, all right, good, thanks. Let's just keep doing this.
That's huge.
Well, listen, Debbie, this has been awesome to have you on. Where can folks find you if they want to look for your services, on, social platforms, whatever you'd like?
So my business name is Pinnacle Personnel Services. I am Pinnacle Personnel on Instagram. Facebook is Pinnacle Personnel Services. Website is Pinnacle Personnel Services. I love to help people understand finances and how to budget and how to plan, because a lot of people don't. I mean, I think that you're one of the few who learned about that stuff when you were growing up, Jeff. So many of us don't, and so many people struggle. And I would say, especially at this time of the year, because we're having sales upon sales upon sales upon sales, and people sometimes feel like they have to go into debt to show other people how much they love them. So I would love to be able to help people get through some of that. And I do have some free budgeting workshops that are available right on my website as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for anybody everyone still watching the show, I will make sure to have in the comments all the links that Debbie mentioned and how you can get a hold of her. Debbie, thank you again so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I had a great time.
And everybody, thank you again for joining another episode of At Home. I'll have, like I said, all the links for how you can get a hold of Debbie, her website, social media accounts, everything down in the comments below. If you have any questions, feedback, anything you're interested in, again, put those in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button if you want to keep up for more videos. I'll be trying to release these every week. Hit the little bell icon that's down here someplace, wherever it is, to get notified as often as we have these new videos. And again, thank you for joining, and we'll see you soon. Have a great one.